What is up, guys? Welcome to another video. Today, we're going to be talking about the idea of nightlife being a humiliation ritual for men. Now, this is a topic that a lot of guys are talking about here on YouTube, but I kind of want to come at it from the specific angle of dating. And also, if you're at all familiar with my videos, you'll know that I'm someone that talks a lot about going out to bars and nightclubs in order to meet girls. So I feel like I have a unique perspective because I'm someone that is just quite familiar with that kind of environment. So, as someone that does go out a lot, I kind of have to agree with that statement that it's a humiliation ritual for men, but I do have some caveats. So, the first big reason that I would agree is that as a guy going to the club, unless if you're paying a bunch of money for a table or something like that, you're gonna usually have to wait in like a long line out in the cold. And at most places, girls, and specifically the really attractive girls, are gonna often get to walk up to the front, get in for free, and not have to wait in line at all. And on one hand, some people would say that's super unfair that certain people get to cut the line just because of the way they look or because of who they are. And that obviously wouldn't fly at, at a grocery store or anywhere normal out in society. But just because it's a bar slash nightclub, it's considered acceptable. That's one argument. The opposing argument would be that, yeah, it sucks when you're in line, but once you're inside as a guy, you kind of want the club to do that because that improves the ratio and they're essentially feeding attractive women to you as a guy. Obviously, they might not like you, but it'll improve your experience once you're inside. So there's kind of two sides to that. But here's the thing, even if you take the latter argument about it being beneficial, it creates this really weird dynamic. And I would say a toxic dynamic between men and women inside of the club. So imagine getting treated like a VIP or like a celebrity just because of the way you look or who you are. A lot of people will get an arrogant demeanor about that. And that's what happens with a lot of these attractive women that, basically are treated like celebrities and skip the line and all that and don't have to pay. They tend to see men even lower than they might naturally out and about. He'll have this like peasant aristocrat sort of dynamic. And that makes them a lot less receptive to being approached, especially if you're not the kind of guy that they're into. And B, it kind of enables them to do a lot of other shitty behaviors because they kind of feel like everything goes once they're in because they kind of got away with, they kind of were treated so much better than everyone else. An easy example of that would be the story I told in my video a couple videos ago. You might not see hypergamy, but hypergamy sees you. And just a summary of that story is that a girl essentially took my turn at the bar to get my drink. And not just that, but she was like super rude about it too. And it's just this arrogance. I believe a lot of that comes right at the door from that sort of arrangement. Another example is that a lot of these places will have a crowded dance floor, and guys and girls that are well mannered will move through in kind of a careful way so that no one gets too upset. They'll say, "Excuse me." They'll maybe lightly push you out of the way. But some of these girls will literally shove you. That's happened to me so many times, and I've seen it happen so many times to other people. I think the worst time was when I had a crush in one of my classes at my college. And, the class ended, and this was, I guess, in the middle of the summer. So it's only been like a few months at this point. And I feel this girl literally shove me, and I didn't know who it was. And I turn around, and it's this girl from my class. And obviously, she didn't remember me. And, she's with her new boyfriend. And it was just like a weird, like, a lot of guys would say a brutal experience, and honestly, it was at the time, getting literally, like, violently shoved, like, I almost fell down. I'm not saying it from even a rudeness perspective, it was just borderline aggressive. So, that maybe is a story for another video, but again, I feel like all of this comes from that dynamic just at the door. Another thing, and this kinda comes from the guy's side, but some guys will have a hard time cutting through the noise at the club, and they'll resort to things like jester maxing and beta bucksing in order to get girls' attention. And if you don't know what that is, jester maxing is sort of acting in a self-degrading, over the top, kind of being like a clown for the girls in order to get their, like, attention or entertain them. And beta bucksing would be like buying a girl a drink without talking to her at all, and, essentially just using money in order to be relevant to them. And the problem is that these 2 behaviors are so common among guys, especially average guys and below average guys when you're out, but even above average guys too. It becomes so normalized that just, like, feeds into this dynamic I was talking about earlier, where girls are just so much above guys socially at the club. It also makes it hard to genuinely meet girls because they tend to get that expectation that that's, the proper way for a guy to, approach them, and that's just not conducive to, a great relationship when when they're expecting you to kind of go above and beyond just to get your foot in the door. This one's specific to certain areas, but in bigger cities and at big nightclubs, there's something called like a bottle service culture. And if you're not familiar with bottle service, it's this idea where instead of just going into the club normally, you'll book either ahead of time or sometimes they do it like at the door. You'll book to get a table or your own little section. And in order to get that table, you have to, like, spend a minimum of, like, it depends, but it can be thousands of dollars, even, like, several thousands of dollars just for one night in order to get, like, overpriced alcohol, you know? But the pros of it is that the club will then, like, kinda funnel attractive girls to hang out with you, and you'll get a kind of a spectacle, and, everyone else has to stand up and be treated like cattle, but you get to sit down and be comfortable and be above everyone else. But that whole culture is super essentially like, dehumanizing for men at the club, and it makes it just such a negative experience if you're someone that isn't trying to spend thousands of dollars in one night. I think the original idea for bottle service was like to celebrate a birthday or promotion, and you go with a bunch of your friends and you split the price. That's one thing, but the problem is that it's become, like, in these big cities like Miami or New York and a lot of other places too, it's become, like, a main way for the club to make money, and essentially the whole club works as a system where they get, you know, the majority of guys show up and, they're treated like cattle, and then the attractive girls are funneled to the guys at the table that are spending way more than the normal guys, and the normal guys feel like shit, so next time they're out, they decide to get a table because that's the only way that they think they can attract girls, and it's just this horrible cycle where it's like a meat someone commented this on one of my other videos about how it's like a meat grinder, and, average men are kind of the meat that's being grinded, and the girls are the bait, and the companies that own these clubs are the cranking the wheel. And, you do not want to be the meat in the meat grinder, guys. This one's sort of inherent to Night Game, and that's the idea of hypergamy and intersexual competition being clearly on display and even elevated compared to other places. So naturally, nightlife is gonna attract guys that are tall, good looking, and confident because those are guys that tend to do well in that sort of superficial environment. So if you're going as an average guy or an above average guy, it can be quite painful, I guess, to be mogged in person, basically. The next one is that a lot of these places have very rude security and staff. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of cool guys that work in nightlife and stuff. Some of the guys that work there are working there because they enjoy the power trip and, maybe they're like a total knucklehead, maybe they're insecure, maybe a combination of the 2 in a lot of cases, and, you might get kicked out for dumb shit, they might just be rude to you at the door. I had an experience where I was stone cold sober, I was the designated driver for my friends, and I was kinda overwhelmed, I was having a shitty night, so I went off to the side and kinda sat down and closed my eyes for literally 15 seconds, and this asshole comes and, like, kicks my foot. It's like, "Oh, yeah, you gotta go, you're too drunk." And even though I talked to him and was clearly sober, I was talking to him in a calm way, and even when he told me to leave and, like, insisted, I was like, "Okay, whatever," and I got up and walked, straight without stumbling or anything and left, like, I was obviously sober. But, there's, like, a power trip element to it, and also they are having to keep track of a large amount of, like, drunk people, so there's some pressure on them too, not to make excuses, but all of that can just lead to these, like, shitty interactions. They were where for me, it was quite brutal at the time, but I'm kinda over it. But for guys that aren't expecting that or aren't prepared for that, it could be like a black pilling moment for you. And the last one, this is probably the worst if you really think about it, but it's not as common, is fights and aggressive dudes. And I'll get into how to avoid this later, but guys get drunk, guys feel bad because 'cause they're not getting girls or because they're being flexed on by the guys that are richer than them and have sections and stuff. Just all of this combination of, like, insecurity and horniness and, like, irritability and, like, frustration and all that leads to guys often pressing you or giving you a hard time and stuff and trying to, like, out alpha you in a way. That can suck because best case scenario, you win a fight and now you're going to jail or you're getting sued. Worst case scenario, you get hurt. Or, even if the worst case scenario doesn't happen, you might avoid the fight, but you might feel like you got sort of bullied in a way that isn't supposed to happen in adult life or ever. But, it might bring back bad memories and things like that. And you just have to deal with stuff that you don't have to deal with in your normal day-to-day life with aggressive guys, and that can be a very big downside to going to the club. And I'm sure many guys have, had that happen and have not gone out since because it was such a traumatic thing for them. So given all of this bad stuff that leads to the going out kinda being a humiliation ritual, why is it that I still go? First of all, for me, compared to my day-to-day life, bars and nightclubs tend to attract a higher concentration of attractive women that are my age, in their 20s and stuff, more so than I would see at work or out and about at the gym and things like that. Also, even more than that, there's kind of a culture of being social. There's a social vibe, and you have the opportunity to do low stakes cold approach. So it's one thing to approach a girl at the gym and you have to, if she rejects you, um, she might see it as weird because she's just there to work out and you have no idea if she's single or not. And now you have to see her all the time and it's just weird. Or even if you're like approaching girls at the mall, it's not really expected to be approached by someone at the mall. But going out and approaching girls or being approached by guys is a totally normal thing for people. Like girls go out expecting to be approached by guys and and no one's going to think it's weird if you're approaching girls. Everyone does it. And on one hand it makes you not stand out as much, but at the same time it's low stakes. So no one's going to really remember you because even if she rejects you, which she probably will, you're not the only guy she rejected that night, and she's probably not gonna remember you by the time the next week rolls around. But you can't really say the same about approaching a girl at work or someone you know or something like that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but you can really, like, cut your teeth and practice a lot more at a club because there's just so many people, you can just move on to the next one really fast. And in general, there's a social vibe as well. Just you can meet guys. I'm not saying you'll make your best friends at the club or that you should, but if you're someone that's trying to, like, practice your social skills or improve your social confidence, going out can be really great because even those superficial conversations that don't lead to anything, still can lead to you being a more confident and, like, socially, apt person. Also, there's a bunch of, like, random encounters that you'll have and fun adventures that you'll have that you wouldn't have if you just stayed home on the weekend. And there's an element of randomness that, yes, can work negative to you. Like, you can have these negative things happen to you that are kind of crazy, but you can also have positive things happen to you that are random, um, that you wouldn't really expect. But just if you go out regularly and kind of play the field, you might, for an example, meet a girl that you wouldn't have met on a dating app because of the algorithm, but you happen to be her specific type and there's no algorithm involved. You're standing in front of who you're standing in front of, and, you're in the right place at the right time. That happens a lot, and it only has to happen a certain amount of times for you to, at a minimum, gain a lot more confidence than you would have otherwise, if not, meet someone that you'd connect with. So how can you go out while avoiding the downsides and, making it less of a humiliation ritual? Well, the first thing is gonna be finding bars and clubs that are more on the casual side, and I don't mean casual as in a dive bar. You can still find upscale places that aren't, focused around flexing and this whole bottle service culture. If you're in your 20s, I'd recommend trying to find your college area, which would be like the bars and clubs where college students tend to go to. Those are great because, on one hand, obviously, a lot of attractive girls are in university, but at the same time, a lot of university students don't have a bunch of money. So these clubs aren't oriented towards selling tables. They make their money more off of selling like the cover charge to get in. And a lot of times they don't need to do the whole thing about letting girls skip the line and stuff because there's an abundance of girls depending on your area. So I would definitely go for things like that instead of going for places that are like, you know, super big and flexy and where celebrities go and where if you're not paying, $10,000 a night, you're going to be treated like dirt. Also, regarding behavior, just lower your expectations from people in general and girls specifically. And when you're dealing with a girl, try to think one step ahead so that you can kind of foresee if you're going to be played and you can kind of manage the situation accordingly. Because a lot of times getting played comes from naivety and assuming that, everyone's, sugar and spice and that nothing bad's gonna happen. So if you have a little bit of a skeptical mindset, but still an open mind to social experience, I think that's the perfect balance between putting yourself out there, but not letting yourself be used essentially. Also, find places that you genuinely vibe with. And this can be with regards to the kind of music that's played or the crowd of people that go there. That way, you can enjoy being in the environment for its own sake. And even if nothing great happens with girls or with meeting guys or just socially and stuff, just intrinsically, you would have at a minimum enjoyed your night and have been in an environment that you enjoy. And, you could say, "At least I went out and didn't rot at home. I listened to good music, I was around cool people." Also, a big misconception that I was seeing on my other videos about nightlife is that you do not have to, like, drink at the bar itself or at all. A lot of people go out sober, and B, a lot of people pregame. So the idea about drinks being super expensive or about alcohol being a bad habit, which it definitely is kind of mute because I'm just talking about the environment itself. I'm not talking about the activity associated with it being drinking. You do not have to drink at all, and I'm not suggesting that you do. If a guy does confront you, I'd suggest being aloof instead of being either super meek or super aggressive. You're not gonna impress anyone by making, like, a super big scene, and even if you do impress people, they're not gonna remember, and you might just end up getting your teeth knocked out. So it's better to kind of have this vibe of like, "Oh, what?" And just kinda, like, ignore them, and, think about the fact that, as a guy, you should be trying to talk to girls at the bar, so the fact that he's putting all that energy into you as another man is kind of fruity. And last but not least, treat it like a social gym. If you go to a gym, it's full of weights and machines that allow you to like train to failure and really push your muscles to the limit, and like a safe, controlled environment that simulates nature but doesn't have the consequences of you like falling off of a cliff or being eaten by a bear. And likewise, if you treat going out like a social gym, you can really detach from the outcome and benefit from just practicing. So even if you fail or have a crappy interaction, you can learn from it, and that'll make you more ready for when you meet a girl in a higher stakes environment where it'll be a girl that you meet at work or a girl you're on a date with and things like that. Because at the club, you can just go on to the next one, and like I said earlier, if it goes bad, she probably won't even remember you the next week or even the next hour. And that is it, guys. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, check out my free Instagram maxing course, which is linked in the description. It's free right now, but won't be for long. I have a bunch of video guides and tutorials on building an attractive Instagram. And I'm also working with all the guys in there with one on one consultations regarding their profile and what exactly they should be doing in order to improve. And I'm gonna keep doing those for free until I get too many members and I'm not able to really coach people properly. So if you're interested in getting help, be sure to join so I can help you out while it's free because it won't be for long. Also, if you're interested in more taboo or unfiltered dating content and BP content, make sure to subscribe to my Patreon, which is also linked below. I just got it set up. My first video is on race and dating, so if that's interesting to you at all, be sure to check that out. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.